So yeah, and of course, as always, why Glad and I always enjoy our interaction and fellowship with the congregation here, and just grateful that we can work together in the kingdom. So I've framed the talk that I've been assigned as uh, present and involved fathers, and I'd like to use the passage in John 10. So if you have your Bibles, you can turn to John 10. And I'd like to make some analogies for you as fathers, and how that relates to the good shepherd that we find talked about in John 10. And I know that when we have talks like this that are specifically related to a certain category, which is fathers this morning, I know that some of you here are not married, and some are past the parenting stage, and but I think the principles that we're going to talk about apply just straight across, because one of the things that God has given to us as men, He's assigned headship to the male gender, and so headship, that's a creation principle. So yeah, hopefully that some of the um, things that we talk about are going to be able to apply to everyone. I'd love to read the entire passage from John 10, 1 through 16, but I am going to break in, just for sake of time, going to break in verse 11 and then through 16. So let's read at verse 11. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. But a hireling, he who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. The hireling flees because he is a hireling and does not care about the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I am known, and I know my sheep, and am known by my own. As the Father knows me, even so I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. Now, twice in this passage, we see the master teacher talking about the good shepherd. He makes the statement twice. I am the good shepherd. He says it in verse 11, and then again in verse 14. I am the good shepherd. And I want to go back to look at two qualities that relate. And I want you to think, as we do this, I want you to think as fathers how this relates to you as shepherds of your home. So two things that I see, two qualities that I see of the good shepherd, back in verse 14 where it says, I am the good shepherd. And the first quality that I see is that he gives his life for the sheep. And then the second trait is found in verse 14 where it says, I am the good shepherd and I know my sheep. So those are the two things that we want to hone in on: to give his life for the sheep and to know his sheep. Now, years ago, I had a friend that was a modern day shepherd. And one day I stopped by Farmer Bill's place, and we meandered around the farm, and we were chatting. And eventually we ended up by the sheep pen. And it was there that Shepherd Bill shared some life principles with me that still resonate with me today, some 25, 30 years later. And I'll just put it in my own words, some of the things that he told me. He said, James, he said, I don't have time to sit with my sheep day in and day out all day long, because I'm just too busy. I have too many things to do, and I just don't have the time to sit with them. He said, consequently, I resort to fence building to keep my sheep within the fold. He said, fence shepherding, he said, is actually a lot easier and far less time. It takes far less time than sitting with them all day long. But he said, sheep have a very annoying habit. He said, they always think that the grass is always taller, it's always greener, and always better on the other side of the fence. So they're always looking for a way to get out of their confinement. And he says, sometimes it does. But he says, when that happens, I just build the fence a little bit higher. Or if they slip below it somewhere, I just add another strand at the bottom. He said, I can keep them inside that way. But then he said something that really impacted me. He says, if I make the boundaries strong enough, I can keep them contained. But then he added something that was equally impacting to me, and he said it, what I felt like with a little bit of lament. He said, but here's the deal, James. He said, because I choose the fence shepherd, they don't know my voice, and they don't come running at my call. And that really impacted me, and I've not forgotten that analogy. What I learned from Shepherd Bill that day is that the most convenient way, the easiest way to care for sheep is to corral and to control them. Yet corral and control seems to be the exact opposite of how the text frames the Good Shepherd. Verse 11 says that the Good Shepherd gives his life for the sheep. And then in verse 14 again, the Good Shepherd knows his sheep. He gives and he knows. The Good Shepherd gives and he knows. And I wonder what it means to give and to know his sheep. Now, I'm sure all of you know where I'm going with this, right? I've already said it. I want you as fathers to think about how this compares with your responsibilities as head of home, as shepherd of your homes, and how that relates to the Good Shepherd. The principle, like I mentioned earlier, the principle of headship has been delegated to you, whether you embrace it or not. This is a creation principle. Headship is a creation principle to every male, whether you're married or not, and it's fleshed out in numerous ways. But one of the ways it's fleshed out is if you are married, and that means taking lead, taking headship of the home. It also is further amplified when children are part of that equation. It means that you shepherd them, you take care of them, you know them, you get and you give to them. So in a spiritual sense, I want you fathers to think of headship in terms of spiritual care. What does it mean for you to give to your life, for the sheep, your family? I'm going to zero in just to the home because that's what the focus is on today. And how do you get to know? And I'm not just talking about, of course, you know the person the minute they're born, right? It's your son or it's your daughter, but we're talking about something deeper than that. How do you really get to know the heart of that child, or maybe even your spouse, your wife? And I want you to hold that thought, ponder on it, because we're going to come back to that later on. But I want to deviate just a bit from you thinking of being shepherds in your home. And I want to talk a little bit about another character here that we read about in John 10. And the primary focus, obviously, is typically on the Good Shepherd, right? But Jesus addresses another character that often gets glossed over. And who is that? Who's the other character in this passage? The hireling. Yeah, absolutely. It's the hireling. So what does it say about the hireling? Let's read that again. It says, but a hireling, he who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves and flees, and the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. The hireling flees because he is a hireling and does not care about the sheep. Now, I've underlined several key phrases in these two verses. The hireling is not the shepherd. Two different people, two different characters, or character traits at least. He doesn't own the sheep. He's doing the same work as the good shepherd, right? He's taking care of the sheep, but there are a couple traits about him that don't follow through with the good shepherd. When he sees the wolf come, and by the way, here's the deal, the wolf's attack says a whole lot more about the shepherd than it does about the sheep. I want you to think about that. It says a whole lot more about the shepherd than it does the sheep. And by the way, the wolf, it's not a matter of if the wolf will come or whether the wolf will come. It's a matter of when will he show up. He's always shown up, right? Since Grandpa Adam and Grandma Eve formed the first family, he's been intent on destroying families ever since that time, and he is still at work today, maybe in even greater ways and devious ways than ever before. So when he sees the wolf come, the hireling, what does he do? Two things. What does he do? He leaves. What's the second thing? And he flees. Okay, does that mean that he has to actually run away? Well, it could involve that, but it may not always be that way. So when he leaves and when he flees, what does the wolf do then? Two things. Catches the sheep and he scatters them. Okay. So I think it's pretty easy for us to think in those terms of what can happen in the home when we take on the mentality of a hireling, or we take on the character trait of a hireling. And I want you to think in terms, three different ways that I want to think of a hireling and how a hireling will manifest itself or may manifest itself. This may not be an exhaustive list. These are at least three ways, I think, that a hireling can manifest itself in the home. First way, or in a man, in a father. The first way is through selfish passivity. Secondly, through passive aggression. And thirdly, through selfish aggression. And I'd like to break these three down a little bit more in more specific ways. First one, selfish passivity. A hireling, or a father who takes on the character trait of selfish passivity. 5 things that come to my mind, at least. And again, these aren't exhaustive lists, but these are at least some of the traits, I think, that go along with a hireling. Selfish passivity is evident when men are preoccupied with things that God has called them to or desired and designed them to do. He's absent, but he's present. And I'm the first to raise my hand that I can be sitting at the table and I'm having a conversation with myself. And pretty soon Glad is looking at his, and she'll go, yes. And then I tell her, well, I need to talk to somebody decent once in a while. That's my way to get off of that. But I'm present. I'm right there beside her, right? I've been there, and I did that with the children. I was there, but things are going through my mind, and I'm having these conversations with myself. Absent but present. Selfish passivity also holds back on headship and lets others act when God calls him to action. It's the Adam within us that stands there watching his wife partake of the fruit. God gave him very, very explicit instruction. He didn't give it to Eve. He gave it to Adam. He says, look, you are not to eat from this tree. And he stands there and watches. I think the NIV would probably point that out a little clearer than maybe the New King James or the King James. I think the NIV says, Adam, who was with her, standing there watching her eat, doesn't stop her, and then as she offers it to him, he partakes as well. Now, Timothy, I believe it is, in Timothy, in the New Testament somewhere, it says that Eve was deceived. Eve was truly deceived. Adam was not deceived. But he was passive in his headship. He said, he just didn't do anything about it. That's the trait of a hireling. Thirdly, the selfish, passive man buries himself in work, in sports, in recreational activities of his choice. He's too self-absorbed to notice the hollow looks in the women close to his life, which could be his wife or his daughters, or the loneliness in his son's voice when he wants him to come play. And his selfishness also can force unrealistic expectations, especially on his sons. Oftentimes that happens. That's the characteristic of a hireling. The selfish, passive man has no idea what it means to have and to keep the hearts of the children, let alone his wife. And perhaps the greatest tragedy of this is that he doesn't care because he's too self-absorbed. He checks out emotionally and spiritually. Oftentimes, a hireling won't pray with his wife or his children, or when they do have family devotions, it seems lifeless and rote. And so there's just not a lot of spiritual input there. Again, I think it's in Timothy that maybe it's Peter. I'm getting my verses mixed up here. That it talks about the husband washing his wife by the water of the word. And people have asked me already about that. And what does that mean? And I think the way I've explained it is that it is the duty and the responsibility of the husbands to take what God has shown you in Scripture and instruct your wife with that. And it cleanses her. I don't know how many times that I've done that to Glad, and she'll always come back and say, I love when you do that to me, because it helps me trust you. It helps me, I know that you're relying on the Scriptures, and so it makes me want to trust you. And so that's how we cleanse our wives, by the washing of the water, by the word. And we do that. It's a way of speaking into their lives. The last thing that I have on the selfish, passive man is that he ignores sacrificial love because love for himself is greater. Addictions are his alibi because, like Adam, he blames, points the finger, makes the innocent party feel the weight and the guilt of whatever sins he has committed, but he forgets that three fingers are pointing back at him. So that's at least some traits of a selfish, passive person, and we can easily fall into that pattern as fathers. There's a second way that I would suggest that we can that this can manifest itself, or the ways that headship can be sabotaged, and that's through selfish passivity or selfish aggression. The selfish, aggressive man is one who conforms outwardly, but internally they're actually full of resentment. On the outside, they may be calm, they might be cool and collected, but on the inside, they are raging and sullen. The passive, aggressive man is cold and calculated. And he refrains from talking until he can lash out, not with raised voice or yelling, but with cutting, biting words that crushes the heart of the recipient, and he offers no apology for it. In fact, he feels justified by his insensitivity. The old adage that says, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never harm me. Yeah, if you want to kill somebody, words can kill, big time. And you don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to raise your voice. The passive-aggressive man will also sulk when things don't go his way. He refuses to talk, to engage, to have meaningful dialogue. His behavior is cowardly because he avoids a conflict. And this is the guy that gives his wife the silent treatment as a way to punish her. That's how he lashes back. Again, not physically, not yelling, screaming. He just withdraws. He closes up. There's no emotional support for her. And by the way, emotional support is one of the biggest things that your wife and your children need from you. It's one of the biggest things that they need. Now, we don't do real well as men with emotional support. We're too realistic here. But that's really what they need. That's what they want. And that's how you can minister to them. But a passive-aggressive person will withdraw and refuse to enter into their world. I would suggest that a passive aggressive man lives by the ancient Chinese proverb that says, behind the smile, a hidden knife. See, pretense is his friend. In fact, pretense, he is full of pretense because it is important for him to look good in front of other people. He can act like the devil to his family, but in the public, there's a whole different nature. And then we wonder why children grow up in their teens and in their adult years, and they walk away from the gospel that the parents and that the father has espoused. Why? Because it's a farce. It's hypocrisy. It doesn't match up. Why wouldn't you? And the last thing that I would say about the passive aggressive person is that he often indulges in moral failure, thinking that his sin leaves no effect on those around him. One of Satan's biggest lies is to make men believe that the sin of pornography is personal and is not violating anyone else but yourself. And friends, that is just so not true. That is just so not true. And I'd like to break this down for you a little bit, flesh this out if you allow me to. First of all, I would just say that the greatest transgression, of course, is against God, right? Someday you will stand before the great white throne and you will give an account before God. So it definitely affects your relationship with God if you're involved in this kind of activity. Secondly, I would say that you sin against the person you are lusting after. It doesn't matter if they've made the wrong choice to model themselves. It's still not your body, and you have no right to it. And just because it's available, it does not justify the sin. Thirdly, if you're married, I would say, according to Matthew 5:27-30, you sin against your spouse. Jesus very explicitly says that lust is adultery, and adultery takes place in the context of marriage. And when you indulge in viewing and lusting after other women other than your wife, you are committing adultery according to Jesus. And and I think we just need to call it what it is, right? We just need to call it what it is. You don't have to physically engage with another woman to adultery. Jesus said it happens at the level of lust. That's the third person that you sin against. The fourth one, if you're unmarried, you sin against yourself and against your future spouse, should God call you into marriage. If I may, I just want to speak to you young men, that it's very, very naive for you to believe that pornography during your single years will not have an effect on your marriage later on. Take it from a person who knows. I've sat with far too many broken marriages to know its effects in how that immorality, in what immorality produces later on in life. Think about it from the woman's perspective, from the young girl's perspective. Do you think that any reputable girl wants to date someone who has fornicated with 100 different women? Think about it. And we think that it's my own problem, it's my own. No, it will affect the relationship later on. And so I just think that you need to put yourself in their shoes. Now, is there forgiveness? Of course there's forgiveness. Always forgiveness. The ground is level at the cross, right? But sin always, always, always has repercussions. Always has repercussions. Now, again, God's grace and his power and his redemption can call us to live above that, but it does oftentimes come with some severe struggle later on in life. So I would just implore, I would beg you, young man, to run. Be like a Joseph when the temptation was put. Joseph was just as red-blooded as any one of us. And he ran. And my encouragement, even to you married men, is run, run, run. And I know I'm really hitting this hard, and I really want you to know that I care about the person who is caught in this web. I really do care, and I really want to express that I do love you. But I just realized that our society is so inundated with sexual promiscuity that we must talk about this. This must be an ongoing conversation amongst us in order for us to live in integrity and in holiness. And so that's my intent this morning, just to call you to a high walk. There's one more way that I think the hireling can sabotage headship, and that is through selfish aggression. Selfish aggression probably needs the least amount of explanation. The person that is characterized by this trait is characterized by his mocking, his taunting, his criticizing, his narcissistic sarcasm, his pride, his arrogance that is can't almost you can't break through it. Selfish aggression, the selfish aggressive man misuses and flaunts his power and his headship. Just had I was teaching through some of this stuff some months ago, and I had one of the young ladies in the congregation stand up afterward and said, I watched my grandfather demand things from her grandma. And he'd always follow up by saying, you need to submit to me. Wow. That's not submission. That's not headship. That's domineering. And it's something completely different from what God had intended. Servant leadership for the selfish, aggressive man is a foreign concept, and is not part of his world. The selfish, aggressive person, in its rawest form, opts to physically abuse and strike those in his care. It's also this level of aggression that manipulates sexual pleasure at the expense of the innocent. And in other words, just to put it plainly, these are the ones who sexually abuse or physically abuse those in their care. God has some very harsh words. Jesus said that it would be better for this kind of person that a millstone were hung around his neck and he were cast into the bottom of the sea than that he should call one of these little ones to stumble. I just hardly know of a greater devastation that can happen in a family than for the father to take advantage of his daughters. It's a horrible, horrible tragedy. And also physically abuse the mother or children. Either way. I have a good friend of mine, has had father wounds all of his life. In fact, just recently again, the guy, he's doing very good, by the way. I mean, it's not that he's stuck in a rut or anything. But just recently again, just spent some time with a counselor and just working through past issues. He's 62 years old. But he remembers watching his father beat his brother with a big heavy chain out in the field because he was in a rage and he couldn't control himself. I just can't. My experience was so different. I just can hardly wrap my mind around that. And I would just pray that you would deal. If anger is one of your your frustrations in life, that you allow the Holy Spirit to heal that part of your life. And then I would also just say that for the selfish, aggressive person, you don't always have to become physically violent, because intimidation is also possible. Um, Without striking physically, tongue lashing can be just as emotionally detrimental as any physical wound. In fact, in some places, in some ways, it can even probably be more damaging, because it kills the soul instead of just the body, right? And so, yeah, your words have tremendous ability to destroy. This is some pretty heavy stuff. I mean, even for me it is. And I look back in my own life and just, wish that you could do some things over, right? So we live and we learn, and we try to call each other to a higher walk. If yeah, it would be I would do you a disservice if we'd stop here. Okay, I think I would. So I do want to circle back to the text and talk about two traits of what we find in the Good Shepherd. At the onset, I gave you the story of Shepherd Bill, my friend, who cared for his sheep with fences. And I want to compare Farmer Bill to my then future brother-in-law, Merle, Shepherd Merle. One summer when I was dating his older sister, Dad bought 6 sheep for Shepherd Merle. And Merle loved his sheep. I mean, he spent hours and hours with them, lots of time. In fact, it was not unusual for Merle to be out in the barn for, just hours on end with Molly, Polly, Sally, Jackie, Connie, and Missy. Yeah, all endearing names. And Shepherd Merle spent so much time with his sheep that we could be sitting in the house and having dinner around the table, and one of the sheep would bleat in the pasture, and Shepherd Merle would say, "Oh, that's Connie." And he knew the distinct bleat of each sheep. Now, I would always kid him and say, "You don't know." He said, "You could call him." And no, that didn't go very far with Shepherd Merle. He was so convinced, and I believe him, actually. I really do believe him. But he knew each bleat of the sheep because he had spent so much time with them. Even when he wasn't with them, he knew what was going on there. And when he would walk out, even just hearing the door open, the screen door open in the back of the house, and him starting to walk across the porch and down the sidewalk, regardless of where they were in the pasture, they would come running because they knew Shepherd Merle. He knew them. And so for the remainder of our time, I want to just give you several ways for you fathers, how you can be present and involved. I forgot to look what time I started, honestly. I don't remember what time I started. Okay. Okay. I'll try to wrap up here. The first way that I would like to just suggest to you is to give yourself to your family. The Good Shepherd gives his life for the sheep. A trait of of someone who gives himself is that he is a servant leader. He models what Jesus taught in Mark chapter 10, verse 44. Jesus illustrated what this looks like when he said, "And whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all." And then he raises the bar even higher in the next verse. And he said, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many." A present and an involved father has the capacity to be a servant leader, and he models this to his family. He looks for ways that he can serve them, to give to them. You know, sometimes in just and not because I'm a bad person or I don't think I am, but just sometimes in my self-absorbed way, I will do things first. And I consciously have to stop myself and say, no, let the others, Now, oftentimes my wife will get a dish around the table and she'll hand it to me and I'll say, go ahead, take it first. And just to try to consciously think of serving the other person first. Servant leadership. He also models giving. Now, this doesn't mean that life revolves, and listen to this very carefully. It doesn't mean that life revolves around Johnny and Susie. In fact, that's actually a very dangerous way of parenting. Okay, your life doesn't revolve around them. But when you give to others, you will achieve far more. You will achieve far more, and you will be far more effective if you model to your children how to serve other people, even outside of your family. So it's not so much serving your children, although that can be included, but serving outside, and let them see how that looks, and show them the way. The one that gives his life for the sheep has an others-centered attitude rather than a me-centered attitude. I'd also suggest that the one who gives wears a yes face. And I'm not talking about the sugar kind of daddy who gives in to every whim. That's not the yes face I'm talking about. I'm talking about having the yes face that produces good results. I'll give you an example of this. Recently, our church had the reorganization, our annual reorganization, and one of the brothers was voted in. We have 4 different men's classes. One of them was voted in for one of the classes. Later on, the next day, he came to me and says, "Boy, he just lost his father. They've had a lot of turmoil in their family. Not bad things, just life happening." And he says, "I just don't feel like I'm at a good spot in life right now." Wondered if he could be relieved from that responsibility. So that's happened before. Try not to make it a big habit, but so we went back, and we typically go back to the person with the next highest votes to check in with that person, and I did that. I went back to the person that had the next highest votes. Now, the thing about this person that had the next highest vote, this person already has his plate completely full with other church duties and the way that they serve the community, and just, I would say, probably lopsidedly full. Okay, that's how I would explain his plate. Yet his immediate response to me when I asked whether he would teach was, "Yeah, absolutely, sure, I'd be glad to." That's a yes face. That's a yes face. Never mind the fact that he had just taught a year ago for a whole year. And he's modeling to his children what a yes face looks like, a yes mentality. And it's amazing how that attitude shapes the children in conducive ways. It's just, you model it, it's 20 times, 100 times, I don't know how many times, more effective than any words you speak. A father who gives to his family is a man that fits in the 20% range of the 20-80 rule. And I want you to know that I used to really chafe at the 20-80 rule. You familiar with what I'm talking about? 20% of the people do 80% of the work. And I used to chafe at that. It's just like, come on, why can't this workload get spread? But one day it suddenly occurred to me that this is actually a principle that Jesus taught about in the parable of the talents. So the one talent that was given to the one that wasn't faithful, who did Jesus say that was given to? Where was the one talent given to? the one that had 10 talents, the one that had his plate lopsidedly full. And why wouldn't Jesus do that? Why wouldn't the owner do that? I would do the same thing if it'd be my resources. I'd give it to the person that's most faithful, right? And when I realize that's actually a principle at work, when you see somebody that has his plate full and he takes on yet one more obligation or responsibility, he's actually taking on the one talent that somebody neglected. And when I realize that, I'm not nearly as frustrated anymore about that lopsided mentality here. Now, does it come as a surprise to you if I told you that the person that I told you had the yes face, that took on that extra teaching responsibility for this coming year? Does it come as a surprise to you if I told you that he has parents who are among some of the most actively involved in the church, in the school, at work, and in the broader community? No, it was modeled to him, right? It was modeled to him, and the apple didn't fall far from the tree. And so if you want children to be one of the 20%, model it for them. Have that yes face. There's a second way I would propose that that you can be present and involved as a father, and that is to know your family. To know your family. And the good shepherd, it says, knows his sheep and is known by them. A man who knows his family is a man who engages with his children age appropriately. And I want to try to explain that. I would say that there's, and I'm not a psychologist by any stretch, but maybe just mark it down as having 6 children, okay? There's basically I would say that there's basically 3 stages of a child's life, and each stage requires a certain focus. So I have a little diagram here, and here we have the infant to toddler stage, and toddler, these aren't hard numbers, right? But from birth, I have one, I probably should have had birth, from birth to, 2, 3, 4 years old. It depends on the child a lot. But at that stage, I would propose that one of your highest focus should be on discipline and obedience, calling out discipline and obedience in that toddler's life. And you're low on relationship. Now, I'm not saying that there's no relationship. I'm just saying that's not your primary focus at this age. You want to call out obedience. And by the way, there's a lot of things we could say about discipline. By the way, I've tended not to use the term spanking, and not because of the pressures from the world around us. I really believe there's a difference between spanking and discipline. Discipline is calling out issues of the heart. One of the best books I read as a young dad, and one that I promoted all my life since then, and the one that I would still call out today to you young dads, is Shepherding a Child's Heart by Ted Tripp. Love that book. And it is so important. It is, and the reason it impacted me so much is because I was just caught red-handed. The primary, most of the time when we discipline a child, it's based on behavior. Johnny, don't take that toy from Susie, It's the behavior that we're focusing on. But that's not the primary thing you want to focus on. It's the reason, why does Johnny want to take that toy from Susie? It's because his heart is prone to be selfish. And so that's the thing that you really want to hone in on, is that selfishness. Now, you need to do it age appropriate, right? I mean, you don't have this big dialogue, this theological discussion with your 3-year-old. But you can say, Tommy, that's very, very selfish of you to take that toy away from your sister. We must not do that. I'm even tempted, to take things for myself. And it's that kind of dialogue that talks about discipline and calling them to obedience. I'm telling you, parents, delayed obedience is disobedience. And I'm not talking about being harsh here, but I am calling you to call your child to obedience, because when they learn it at that age, it will be much, much easier to hear the voice of the shepherd when they're adults. The second stage that I would suggest is I'm just calling it childhood stage, maybe that 3 to 4 to 10 to 11. And the primary focus on that, see how that shifts, that's starting to shift. Of course, the younger they are and then the older they are, that shifts. But you start tapering off on that discipline and that focus on obedience, and you start building that relationship. This is a good time that you start really building that relationship. And I'm just telling you, what you have not accomplished by 10, 11 years old in discipline probably won't do you any good after that. It'll probably only make the child angry, is my suggestion. That's why it's so important to capture that at a very, very young age. And you start focusing more on the relationship at this age. And then the third stage is what I call adolescence, up to 16, up to an adult age. And of course, that arrow flips then. Obviously, you don't talk to your 15-year-old, about obeying me. You call them into relationship. And that's the diagram that I would use for age-appropriate, engaging your children age-appropriately. A father who knows his sheep, his family, does not confuse the parent-child relationship. And I just want to tell you, and I might step on some ground here that's going to get me into trouble, but Glad and I vehemently reject the gentle parenting style of parenting that is so prevalent today in our culture. We oppose that, and I really don't make any apologies for it. I'm just saying, parents beware. Parents beware. One of the major disparities of this style of parenting is the high focus given to relationship in the infant toddler stage. It's just opposite from what I just taught you. The high focus on relationship at the infant stage. That's not where you should put your primary focus at that age. I'm not saying, again, like I said earlier, I'm not saying that relationship shouldn't be part of that process, but it's on the lighter focus at that age. Glad and I have noted that there seems to be an increased level of stressed moms, and we're wondering whether the influence of gentle parenting has contributed to the stress. It seems from our perspective that parents revolve around the child rather than around the other way around. Glad shared with me some verses in Proverbs on our way down here. Let me just read them to you. Now, this is Proverbs, right? It's not a word from the Lord as far as, directly from him. Proverbs are general bits of wisdom, okay? And read it this way. The rod and rebuke give wisdom. By the way, if you want this, it's Proverbs 29, verses 15 through 17. The rod and rebuke give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. When the wicked are multiplied, transgressions increased, but the righteous will see their fall. Listen to this last verse, verse 17. Correct your son, and he will give you rest. Yes, he will give delight to your soul. I'm just telling you, fathers, if you can capture that first 4 years of your life in your child's life, there's ample research that has been done that indicates that a high percent of the child's personality is formed in those infant years, those toddler years. A high percent of the personality is formed. And my encouragement to you is capitalize on that stage. This is where you have the greatest influence in your child's life. I just, so maybe some of the stress that we hear. By the way, for whatever it's worth, our first two children were 13 months apart, and then we had the third one come that was about 16 months behind the second one. So we had 3 diaper babies. Man, it just makes me tired to even think of that now. We take care of our grandchildren. At the end of the day, we're like, whew. But we just did it. I don't know. We just somehow we just did it, you know. And Glad was a busy mom. I just don't remember her being stressed out the way that I see a lot of parents with even just one toddler. And I'm not sure what's going on. I'm just wondering whether they have given in to some of this gentle parenting where you need to let the child